This is Paul Casey, the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame educational video series, where we talk about Kenpo principles, concepts. Sometimes we talk about basics, self-defense techniques, the history of forms, systems, styles, the disciplines. The Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame encompasses many different styles, systems, and disciplines because it is the law of the fist. The Hall of Fame represents over a dozen different systems, styles, and disciplines. And occasionally we get a chance to spend some quality time with very important people that make major contributions to the Kenpo world. I'm very honored to be talking to the 2022 Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame Award nominees. These people will be inducted in Las Vegas this year. And we're going to start off with a wonderful lady. She is a professor in the Kenpo world. Would you please welcome Professor Denise Plowman? Hello, how are you, Professor?
Hi, thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Can I call you Denise?
You may.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for coming on. You're up in Idaho, correct?
Boise, Idaho.
Okay.
Born,
Is it
born and raised, yeah.
Oh, you were born and raised there?
I'm a native Idahoan, and Boise, so not too many of us still exist, but yeah.
What was life or in your young days when you were just coming up, and how did you get involved with Kenpo or the martial arts in general?
Well, I kind of came into Kenpo probably a little bit later than a lot of people. In 1994, when the movie The Dragon came out, the Bruce Lee story, I was watching it with my son, who at that time was 5 years old. And after we watched it, he was really excited about it. And I thought, maybe this is something he and I can do together. So I knew that there was a Kung Fu school real close to my house. So I decided to get in the car, drive over there and inquire about what lessons were and what they had to offer, but it was closed. So I was a little bummed out by that because I'm somebody that when I want something, I kind of want it right now. So I knew that there was another school down the road that I passed every day coming home from work, and it had just opened. So I decided to drive down there, and it was open, and it was Boise Kenpo Karate. It was owned by Mr. Steve Moore, who had just recently opened it in '93. So maybe it had been open about 6 months or whatever. And we signed up that day, and my life into Kenpo began at that point in time, mainly because the Kung Fu school had been shut down or closed for the day. So I started training with Mr. Moore. I have been with him for 27 years, nonstop, pretty much. Started working at training at the school. I just fell in love with Kenpo. I hear a lot of people talk about it. Sometimes it's kind of hard to describe why, but it just became a passion. It felt like it was a void that was being filled. I love the physical aspect of it because I was always athletic. I love the challenge of learning the techniques, understanding the principles and the concepts, being grilled by Mr. Moore, usually on a routine basis, both mentally and physically, a lot of times physically. And so I just really got into it. My son kind of pulled him out after a little bit because he was still a little bit too young. He eventually came back in later, but I fell into it, and I was there 5-6 days a week, training 2 or 3 hours a day. After a couple of years, starting to help teach, and then tested for my first degree black belt, actually at the second Jeff Speakman camp in Vegas. And about a year after that is 99, I believe, that Mr. Moore decided that he wanted to go into law enforcement, and he was going to close the school. So I decided to take the school over because I wanted to keep it. We had a family there within Boise, but also on the outside within our AKTS community. And it just meant so much to me. I did not want to see it go away. So I took the school over in 2001. And from there, I worked full time and then would go to the studio immediately after work. I'd be there till 9 or 10 o'clock at night and repeat. And it never was a burden. It was always the idea that I didn't need this school to support myself financially. So the school was only there as long as it could support itself, for which it did for about 10 or 11 years. During that time, I started stepping outside of my comfort zone. We were introducing a lot of kickboxing as the fighting style within our AKTS group. So I was working with Mr. Larry Beltramo, who I believe is also one of the Hall of Fame nominees. My boys, who I call them down in San Jose. So Mr. Beltramo, Mr. Acosta, Mr. Haley, all of them, they were big into the kickboxing at that time. They were taking fights. Mr. Beltramo was the coach. And I had a couple students that wanted to do full contact. So I stepped into the role of coaching, which is completely different role as opposed to being a teacher in regards to what your outcome, that you're looking for. So that was challenging. And we would go down to California because there wasn't a big fight scene up here in Boise like there is now, and go down and do smokers. And so we did that for a couple of years as far as the coaching goes. And I continued with the teaching. And then I was promoted. I worked for the VA hospital for 37 years, and I was promoted into a leadership position that required me to do a lot of travel. And I was finding myself gone 1 to 2 weeks a month. And it was really difficult to, I had people that would help me run the school, but I didn't feel like I could give back to the school like I could, because I was being pulled in so many different directions. So in 2011, I decided to close the school, but I kept a handful of students that I still would teach out of my garage, because I didn't want to get out of it. I just couldn't commit to that full time anymore with the responsibilities that I had with the VA. And that went on for a little bit. I wasn't training as much as I wanted to because I was just so busy with work. But in 2017, I retired. And I was fortunate enough to start with the federal government when I was 17, so I could retire at 55. And so it was an early retirement, and it allowed me to restart up my role into Kenpo to get more into it, and started taking on more students. And then I also had some opportunities to start training at the local Muay Thai school here, so I could get that in. And it also started picking up some training in Pikiti Tertia. So I've kind of gone to different areas as well to help bring that back into my Kenpo journey. So that's where I'm at today. And I thought I was retired, but then my son informed me they were having children, and it happened to be twins. So I actually watch my 4-year-old grandkids, and I have ever since they were a year old, full time during the week. So that in itself it was far easier managing employees than dealing with 2 toddlers.
Congratulations on the grandchildren. That's fabulous.
It's great. It's great. So that's kind of how I got into it, and the journey that it was. I mean, it's hard to explain how Kenpo just becomes your life. I mean, it just draws you in, and it just becomes your lifestyle. It's not something that you do, but it's every aspect of it becomes your lifestyle, and it's included not on the mat, but also off the mat and in your private, outside of the Kenpo world too.
In your journey, in the early days of your introduction to Kenpo, what was the most memorable moment that influenced you to say, this is what I want to do?
I think it was the challenge that was presented to me. Mr. Moore never gave me anything easy. And so I had to work hard for everything that I did. And he was always kicking me outside of my comfort zone. So he's putting me in situations that probably outside of the Kenpo world, I would never have probably done. And so many times you do that, you just start to build that confidence up. And I don't know that it was one particular moment, but it's just that feeling that I had so many times stepped outside of that comfort zone and was successful, that it just started to really resonate with me. But, oh, this is great. I just love this feeling of being, accomplishing something and being successful in it, and constantly being pushed out to do more and more. So I think that's what really resonates with me.
How many years have you been an instructor?
Um, 25. Yeah.
In your first years of teaching as an instructor, did you reflect on that same feeling that inspired you to pursue
I think
Kenpo?
so, but I also got, as when I first started teaching, it was the excitement of seeing my students and how I communicated with them, that they would get that, and seeing their accomplishments based upon how I was able to teach them. I think that was extremely rewarding, knowing that what I was doing was right, and so we often there was 4 Kenpo schools in this area that we were all affiliated under the same organization, under John Sepulveda. And we did a lot of seminars and testing together. So your students were testing outside of just your school. We were going to the other schools and testing, and you would get the feedback from the other instructors, and obviously from Mr. Sepulveda when he was doing seminars on that. And to hear the feedback that what you've done is, you're doing a tremendous job, and you see that on the mat as your students are moving and how they're moving. I mean, that to me was really a positive, huge effect on me, that I knew that I could pass this on, and it was sustainable for them as they moved on. And then as some of those then became my instructors. So it was kind of that passage, that that family history of where I started, I trained somebody, then they became an instructor for me, and they would start teaching, and I would see their students, and I would just see that transition and those different generations.
Do you teach children?
We did not, we mainly had adults, but yes, we had a few children. Mhm.
Was there a different approach for you as a teacher for children versus an adult?
Patience. And part
Oh,
of
the
it,
butterflies have been let loose.
oh yeah. Well, and part of it is at that time, my son was back into the fold. And so he was also training at that time. So he was around 7 or 8 when he came back. So he was on the mat, and he was, there was always a lot of feedback from him because probably like his mother, he was very direct and had no problem in telling me what he liked and didn't like. But it's just a different approach as far as what you're trying to get them to achieve as far as what an adult is. And so you have to, in my opinion, you have to make it, you've got to ask the kids, what is it that you want, and then you're here, I'm sure in a lot of places here, you're dealing with a lot of competition here with soccer and baseball and football and that, and especially soccer. Soccer started to really blow up that time around here. So that competition with trying to, the kids, whether they're coming to karate or they're going to soccer practice or baseball or, how you were able to keep them on the mat, you had to be pretty creative. But I also had a lot of my instructors who were teaching the kids class, and some of them were just outstanding with kids. I mean, they just brought the energy, and with the kids classes, you have to have a lot of energy, a lot of energy.
In your journey in the martial arts, obviously you're coming up, did you find yourself transitioning to competition tournament participation?
So that was one of the many times that I was kicked out of my comfort zone, and I was told that there was not, hey, you should look at this. It was, you're competing at the next tournament. And so there was 3 of us at that point in time, and Mr. Moore pretty much said, you will be at the next tournament. Had no clue what we were to do. I think I was a purple belt at the time. So we started competing. At that time, there was maybe 3 tournaments a year here. So we don't have, like in California, that the number of tournaments that you can go to. So we're limited, but we had 2 or 3, 2 of them twice a year were put on by the Kenpo schools here all together. But it was inclusive of all styles, but the 4 schools put that together as one project. So yes, I did compete in sparring and in self-defense, in forms. I guess another, you talk about accomplishment, is when I, first time I won grand champion in the forms. That was just an unreal thing at that point in time. And I remember doing that form, and it was the first time that I ever I was in a zone. I can't explain how I got in that zone. I can't explain how I got out of that zone, but I knew everything that I was doing at that particular time doing that form, where that had never happened before. A lot of times you start doing your forms and it just becomes automated motion that you've done so many times. I knew everything, and with that, I attribute the fact that I was fortunate enough to win the grand champion that year, 2 years in a row.
Did you ever compete at the internationals?
I did not. No, I did not. I don't, being up here, we're kind of disassociated with a lot of stuff that was going down there, even though we had a lot of people that came up to our area for seminars and stuff. So I did not have the opportunity to compete in the internationals.
In your training, did you ever have the opportunity to go to a seminar and participate with either Mr. Moore or Mr. Sepulveda?
So I traveled often prior to my promotion at work. So I would be going to a lot of our other schools in the AKTS. We also had camps that once a year we would have a big camp. Sometimes it came to twice because we started having them on the West Coast and the East Coast. So I would go out there. I was an instructor a few times at those camps. Both on the East Coast. In Texas, I was asked by Mr. Wedlake to come out and teach at the camp in Texas. I want to say if it was Mr. Duffy's camp, but so I went out there and taught. So I've had the opportunity to go even outside of my organization and teach at some of those camps or seminars, as you call them. But yes, I've traveled around or go down a lot of times to California, to San Jose, and to the seminars down there as well too.
Is there a certain curriculum that you try to present, or is it you just listen to the promoter and say, this is what we like to see you do? Or is there something that you like to specialize in your seminar presentations?
We were never, like for our camps seminars and that, we were never given a subject to hear, kind of get your lesson plan around this. I really liked, what Mr. Moore instilled in me, and still to this day, I instill into my students, is basics. And I love working a hardcore basic class to where you're focusing on your stances and the punches and the kicks and putting those into combinations, or how could they relate to a self-defense technique or whatever. And then also the sparring, because I like the fighting aspect of it, especially when we started doing the kickboxing. So if I did anything, usually it was more geared towards some basics, and then how we could pull that into our fighting. And at that time, not all the schools were doing kickboxing. So we were doing a lot of introduction of kickboxing and some of the basics in kickboxing that we could then apply to the fighting that we were doing in the various schools.
Did you ever meet Frank Trejo?
I did. I did.
Love you with the way you're talking.
Well, so my instructor knew Mr. Trejo very well. And because Mr. Moore trained down at the West LA school. So his first instructor was Mohammed Topatabai. And I think Mr. Tatum was there at that time, but he also knew Mr. Trejo. And I was fortunate enough through Mr. Moore to meet a lot of those seniors down there in California, Mr. Autry, Diane Tanaka, obviously Mr. White. I mean, through him and through Mr. Sepulveda, they opened a world up and of inclusiveness, that it didn't matter what rank you are, you were always included in this group. And I went down to the homecoming that they had down there at the LA school. What was that? I don't know, late 90s, I believe, maybe 2000s. Mm-hmm. Diane Tanaka had invited me to come down to the homecoming. So I was down there. I met Mr. Canaster, Mr. Kelly, or was Mr. Kelly there? I might have met him in Vegas. And we went to Vegas every year with Mr. Speakman's camp. And so I met a lot of those people there as well. And they all had a huge influence on me one way or the other. And then one dear to my heart is Sigon Labounty. I mean, he spent many time, he was up here with us many times, stayed in my home, often taught at my school. We had a lot of conversations. a lot of colorful conversations. I miss him dearly. But he was a huge influence as well too. And he was probably, you know, he was a strong advocate for women knowing how to defend himself, basically because of the career that he did and what he saw. So I was oftentimes used as an example, and in some former conversation, he would say, he would pull me in and want me to work with somebody. And his comment was, I want you to plowman them. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? What do you mean plowman? I don't understand what that means, but I did. So I was very fortunate to meet a lot of those. And yes, Mr. Trejo as well too, and took his classes down there in Vegas.
Your position on teaching sport karate, tournament fighting versus self-defense fighting in the school.
So to me, the only difference is rules. You know, so when you go and you're gonna fight at a tournament, you have a rules, you're gonna win, and your technique is gonna be based off those rules and that you do. But still, your basics are of how you're doing that fighting still exist. Bring it back to the school or out on the street, there's no rules, and so you can then do the target areas that you can't do maybe in the sport karate world. And I find that a lot with the training of Muay Thai, because Muay Thai has some great, I love Muay Thai and the fighting skills in that, but again, there's rules, you know, so you are learning a competitive sport and that's how you're doing it, but your basic strikes and how you apply them are still there. So I would say, to me, really the only difference is the rules that you have. And then you adjust based upon that and the timeline that you have at a tournament, what you're going to have to do. Maybe tweak a little bit about how you move around in the ring and in and out and stuff, where a little bit different, but the core basics of fighting is still there.
Have you met Danny Riddardi and his son, Steve, in Montebello?
I have not. No.
They are very big advocates. Actually, Mr. Riddardi was the one that brought Muay Thai to America many years ago. The competition, he was very big on that. He uses a lot of those principles when he talks. And, you know, for a guy that's, I think he's like I want to say he's 83 or 84. Man, he is, you know, just got the energy. Another person, do you spend any time with Mr. Chuck Sullivan?
No, but I did a lot of classes in Vegas, and that with Benny Urquidez, who I absolutely adored. And just his character, his classes, I took a lot of stuff back from his classes, but what really resonated with me with him is in Vegas, I think it was Sunday after class or something, I went across the street to go get some coffee or whatever, and he was in there with one of his students. And he recognized me from class, and he just started talking to me. And then I told him, I said, yeah, I said, you know, I'm starting to implement some kickboxing into our classes and that. And he said, you know what, anytime, give me a call if you ever want any feedback or whatever. And I just thought, you know, that's just, and that's one of the things I love about the Kenpo world, the Kenpo family being extended in that, is the willingness of people wanting to share what they have and not hold it to their heart and say, oh no, you can't have this. I've been fortunate to be around so many people that just want to share and expand on that Kenpo and spread it out to the world. And so that really stuck with me there. And I kind of sent him a couple emails, and he responded back and helped me with some things that I was trying to implement. And I really appreciated that.
What is the best lesson that you learned from your instructors? Give me one, maybe two, one for your mind and one maybe for the mat.
Well, for the mat, it's always going to be basics. You can't do anything else unless you have your basics down. And so it's just that consistent, repetitive, working those punches, working those kicks, those blocks, those stances, the footwork. That's what builds your techniques, your forms, or whatever you want to do. If you don't have a solid foundation in your basics, nothing else is going to work. And I think for the mental or the spiritual side of it was just the self-awareness, the self-confidence of challenging yourself, setting goals for yourself, and really being put out there to hit those goals, and the what you get back as far as the confidence that then expands out into your private life as well outside of Kenpo. So I can't, I would not have had the professional career that I had at the VA without all of the lessons that I learned from all of the instructors on the mat and the conversations off the mat. That's what helped build me to become the strong manager that I was and recognized on a national level within the VA. And I attribute all of that to the VA, or to my Kenpo.
Did you ever meet Ann Parker?
I did not. I started after he passed.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. But well, you've actually have met him by those teachers,
met
every
him.
one of those teachers that you have spoken to.
Well, and my instructor. So Mr. Moore trained with him. He actually left Boise, moved out. Mr. Parker came up here and did a seminar, and he was so impressed that he packed his bags and moved down to LA to train down there. So he was around Mr. Parker. So the influence that he had obviously comes through to me, obviously with Mr. Sepulveda, with Mr. Labounty, with Mr. White, all of those guys, they are spreading, what Mr. Parker has. So through them, I have met Mr. Parker, but not personally. Yeah.
Well, you come from an amazing lineage. I
do.
You really do.
I'm very spoiled. I'm very spoiled in that regards.
No, I wouldn't say you're spoiled. You're very
fortunate.
No, I want to say that you're very talented, and they saw it.
Yeah.
And that's why they cultivated those gentlemen, including Mrs. White and any other of the very proficient female Kenpos like Diane Tanaka. They see talent. They understand talent, and you have it. And it is truly amazing how you present that, what great confidence you have. And you're truly an asset. Do you have any final thoughts before we close out here on, say, a vision of what you want to see Kenpo, how it may go, or where it may go for you?
Well, for me, as we reach those points in our life that, unfortunately I can't move like I used to when I was in my 30s and that. So you kind of reassess, what can you do that is still going to be beneficial and productive in the Kenpo world? And being fortunate to be with Mrs. White in the Kenpo Women's Symposium and highlighting the women and what they're doing out there. I think my goal, outside of continuing to teach and pass on what I've been doing for years, is to really highlight those women and set the standard out there and open the doors for other women to come in with the confidence and know that this is something for them. When I started back in '94, the amount of women that were in the martial arts was very limited. And usually you might have 5 or 6 at a school, if that. And some places it hasn't changed. I mean, when I go train in the Muay Thai, I'm usually the only woman there for that class, which I don't care. But I want to set the example to know that all these women can come in and carry on to where we're not here anymore, and set that foundation that they have mentors and people they can talk to help them if they have questions outside of, what they should be working on with their instructors and stuff. So really build that program with Mrs. White and what she envisions, and then continuing to highlight all those amazing people out there, the women that are out there that more often than not, people wouldn't know about them. So I think that's really my goal now. That's kind of how I've turned the corner into another phase of Kenpo. Yeah.
I have to say, your energy is intoxicating. You have such a positive outlook and attitude, and it's obviously reflective from all the training and your life experiences, especially like that. I am so honored to know you now.
Thank you.
And I really do look forward to seeing you in Las Vegas with everyone else. So on behalf of the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame, congratulations, Professor Denise Plowman. We do look forward to seeing you in Las Vegas. Well deserved. And I know that the attendees will be very excited to see you. So we're going to close out with that. Thank you very much. And no further ado, salute. Have a great night.
You too.